So I'm really excited for our next guest here, Daniel and Derek Salter. Daniel and Derek Salter are the grandsons of Daniel Morris Salter, and discusses his way above top secret military career and his book Life with the Cosmos Clearance.
I just want to let people know that we're kind of going to be telling us, it's basically a story, our grandfather's story. It's been hard for us because he started to deteriorate over the last few years. When he started to speak, he really went downhill a little bit in his health, and we'll get into that when he went to the Disclosure Project. You see there, the original Disclosure Project with Dr. Greer in 2001. He was there at DC, but his career, he basically started at the pinnacle or at the height of all this activity in 1947 in the U.S. Air Force until 1968. And then he joined the Secret National Reconnaissance Office, or NRO, in 1969. And we don't know when that ended. Now, I could find all records, the military records of his Air Force background, but nothing on the NRO. So that's still, at this stage, it's still speculative, but we have a lot of evidence that will shows that he must have been telling the truth and been involved at some level. So we'll get into that. And then lastly, of course, his book came out in 2003, Life with the Cosmos Clearance. And we didn't know he was writing that book. We didn't know anything, even that he was going to go in 2001 with Dr. Greer. We had no idea that he was involved at that level, or he would be sharing that. So it all came out us later on, as everybody else found out, we found out. So that's why it's so hard for us to kind of now put the pieces together. Hopefully we can help explain as we go here. You can keep going. All right. So the first slide here, just within his records, just showing you the start date. It was June 6, 1947. Now remember, Roswell happened right after July 4th. So it was about exactly 1 month before Roswell. And this was still the Army Air Force back then. Okay, can keep going. And I'm just gonna have to work off the slides for my brother. So this is the military, just some of the
these
dates.
These are different enlistment dates when he started in 47 all the way through 67 and in his military ID. Yep.
Okay. And this I thought was significant to show you the actual stripes, the Chief Master Sergeant stripes, because that's what he eventually became, which is basically the highest rank you can get as a non-commissioned officer, meaning you didn't go to a military academy or college. You just came straight into the military. So he had those old stripes you can see on the right there. His uniform actually did have that. He served a few different tours of duty, Japan, and that's actually where he met our maternal grandmother, and brought her over with my mom, with our mom, shortly after that, in 1950. The Korean War he was a part of. He never spoke about the Korean War, but we know it was quite a lot of trauma and a lot of things that you after war you don't really talk about. So we didn't hear much about it, but we know he was involved. He made it back, and he didn't think he was even going to survive that. But look at this at the bottom here. It shows you too, that Chief Master Sergeant was an additional rank that they had to put within the Air Force, mainly due to the technology explosion after World War II. So this kind of goes into what we're going to talk about later, but a lot of it had to do with technology, and they just didn't have enough higher rank to put these people that were specialists or that would have the expertise in those areas. So that was an E9 Chief Master Sergeant, which is only 1% of those enlisted at any given time in the Air Force. And you can keep going. And and Dan, you can chime in anytime, but we'll try to get through these first ones quickly because there's a lot of material. So can you, I don't know why it's not showing.
So are you trying to move forward to another slide?
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. Sorry, guys.
That's just the retirement announcement of retirement. A lot of his medals that he won, he obviously did a lot. Had some bronze, silver stars, expert marksmanship, certain things, but we can move on. But that's just showing you what he had there as far as commendations. Now, this is important. This is the one piece of evidence that shows he had a top secret clearance. Interesting that it was dated 1966, I think is what it says down there. So towards the very end of his Air Force career. But based on his testimony, what he shares in the book, he had access to much higher level of information early on in his career. And maybe this was just a way for them to have something on paper to say, don't talk about anything. Now we have you. If you try to speak out once you leave the Air Force, you have a legal document that holds you to your oath. So that's mainly probably why they made him sign it towards the end of his career there. That's our guess anyway, but we'll show you as we go here what he was involved with. His little card here, he was a flight instructor in Dallas, Texas, after he retired officially at Mountain View College. So he put NRO plus UFO on his business card, along with Air Force and DCCCD, and we'll talk about what that means pretty soon. So that's just interesting what I found. We have a storage of information that we got when he passed away. My brother has a lot of the storage stuff still to go through, and I have quite a bit of papers I've gone through myself. So
yeah, so we're on our own investigation, going through his documents. But yeah, his NRO career was top secret and was not talked about until the 90s. And this was the cover, apparently, that he was the flight instructor at this community college.
So this is just a picture of the Disclosure Project with Dr. Greer in 2001. If you guys aren't even familiar with that, please go back and see this. I feel like now that we're talking, we just listened to the last presentation, and it's like a lot of it's great work that we're trying to figure out, and get to the bottom and real true evidence of what's happened. But I also want to make sure that people don't lose sight of the fact that there's so many great testimonies and people that have come out over the years, especially way back then, that seem to kind of just swept under the rug, especially because 9/11 happened. I don't think, obviously it wasn't an accident, and it probably was the timing just to kind of put this aside and on the back burner so nobody would think about it. But it was groundbreaking stuff, talking about ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, like Dr. Greer's holding up there, from Mark McCandlish, who apparently was probably suicided. And a lot of these people were, have been, and a lot of threats, a lot of issues with their health. And Clifford Stone, I think someone within their family, one of his family members, was maybe killed because of him coming out. So it was very taboo to be talking about this. And our grandfather knew that. And that's a picture of our grandfather behind Clifford Stone. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because our grandfather actually he was the one out of all those 20 some witnesses that didn't get a chance to speak. He froze when he got to the podium. He was just too scared to say what he had to say. After all that preparation to get there and do everything, as an old man, he was ready to come and testify, and he just said, I can't do it. He froze up. Dan Willis was there, who we've talked to, who was also a witness at that conference, and he said that he just seemed scared and shut down as soon as it was his time to go. And my mom actually said that he left early. He called her and said, I'm not comfortable here, I want to leave. He left before the conference was over. So that's just giving you an idea of that. He wasn't afraid for his life, and probably afraid for our lives, of his family members. So we're lucky that maybe he didn't say what he had to say, because there's a lot here that we're going to cover that if he had come out with that in 2001, we would be much farther along, I think, than we are now, or at least there would be less of a stifling of the information, so we'll keep going from that. This was just a first encounter that he had. Actually, his first sighting was 1949 in Warner Robins Air Force Base. And so that he talks about that. He was working radar. He's a radar specialist in communications and electronics. So that was his first sighting. He had a team of guys on the tower. They saw that with their eyes, the UFOs, plus they had it on radar. They saw it blip across the screen way faster than anything, actively at that time that could go that fast. Nothing on record within their military, could do that, or anywhere in the world. So they knew it was something. Cosmos is what they would call it. And then they came and basically confiscated all the photos from him. But our grandfather took a copy and gave it to his crew and said, keep this for your kids, grandkids. So supposedly this is one of those copies. But anyway, so the NRO, as we mentioned, that's where we're going to be talking about next, and how we got into that secretive side after the military career that he was in 69. Guardians of the High Frontier, or the Coldest Warriors, might be other terms used for them. That's the badge for it. Keep going. And this is a lot of details, but thanks to Dan Willis Dan Willis has a website, thewebmatrix.net. I recommend it to anybody for, I mean, so much, a full history of the UFO phenomenon in detail. But this is just a short history of 1947 and what was taking place right after Roswell with the National Security Act enacted by President Harry Truman that established not only the Air Force, but the CIA, the National Security Council. Allen Dulles wanted to convert the OSS into the CIA, you know, the OSS being what was used during World War II, and getting all that spy and secret stuff from the Germans. And Allen Dulles was known to be in bed with the Germans and known for a lot of other things, especially leading up to JFK's assassination, likely tied to that. MJ-12 was established 6 days after in September 24th to handle all UFO ET related materials and have it under their administrative control. Admiral Hillenkoetter was supposedly, he was the CIA director, the first one, and MJ1. If you look at the list of people and the names of those people, they're available and they seem to be pretty legit. Now we have to say, did MJ-12 exist? According to our grandfather, yes. And according to a lot of people, yes. So, you know, there are some things you're going to have to take at face value and do your own research and discernment to figure out, you know, what's true and what's not. And that's all we've been doing this whole time. So we don't count anything out, but we use discernment the whole time. So Operation High Jump's important, of course, going to Antarctica, Admiral Byrd, seeing these German UFOs and having that basically like a battle, a very short battle where they kicked them out, basically. Operation Paperclip was bringing the Nazis over, all the Nazi scientists into NASA, into other programs like Werner von Braun, who was the head of the rocket science and at the NASA during that time, NASA program. So the deep underground bases were also going on. So just real quick, that picture was actually the same time our grandfather went to the 2001 disclosure conference. Well, he seems pretty healthy here. This was right before he went to DC. Within those next couple of days, he went up to DC, and you can see in that picture behind Clifford Stone, he looked a little bit more like almost like aged or like not well. So it seemed like something might have happened where they were trying to really prevent him from saying something. So that was just interesting to note. This is the important document about MJ-12's creation, and it's Harry Truman, the president, writing to Secretary Forrestal, saying that all matters, you know, from this point on, take, you know, with due speed and caution upon your undertaking, and they're now referred to as Operation Majestic 12 regarding ETs and any UFO phenomenal type of stuff. This is basically that letter. And it goes to the president at that time and Dr. Vannevar Bush and this director of CIA. And Forrestal was also the only one that wanted to speak out within MJ-12. He was a part of the original team, but because he wanted to speak out, they tried to suicide him and get rid of. He was suicided and at a mental institution where they were trying to detain him. So it shows you at that time what happens when you try to speak out. And it was like an example being set for all those within a level of secrecy to say, if you speak, you're going to pay the price, ultimate price. This is supposedly the operations manual for finding crashed, recovered, you know, craft, ET crash retrievals. And these are the types of shapes of saucers and whatnot. You see the triangle shape, and cigar shaped, which is more common now. And then the circular, more conventional. I noticed this on the document. I just noticed this with the slides. If you see, it says Majestic 12 group, and then it says Washington 25 DC, and then it has the date, April 1954. Well, we'll go to the next slide and you'll see that same W. If you look at this license plate on the right, it says WA25 DC. So I didn't realize this, and I don't think my brother saw this either, but this is the license plate our grandfather had, and it had the Interplanetary Phenomenon Scientific and Technical Counterintelligence Unit on that plate. And it was basically a gift when he retired, when he supposedly from the military, from his career. So almost as if it was maybe like a joke, but it wasn't a joke, because our father actually confirmed that he had a van. Our grandfather had a van that he gave as a wedding present to our parents, and our dad had this van with this license plate on it. and he was an engineer, civil engineer, going down to do a meeting at Norfolk Naval Station, of all places, one of the probably highest, places to have access to. And he was in this van with this license plate. He's driving up, and everybody that he works with said, "There's no way they'll let you on the base. You're going to be interrogated for the next, half hour or more, and they're going to try to get all they can do to prevent you from getting on a base without any special access." But as he's driving into the security gate, the security guard just waved him right through. He did not have to stop at all. He was in this van. They didn't have any clue who else was in the van. They just let him go through. So anyway, he told us this story a couple of years ago because he just happened to remember it after we're discussing these things. And he said that it was when he left, he was so curious, why did they let him in? And so when he left, he stopped by that security guard at the gate and said, what was the reason why you let me in just without, any paper ID? He said, well, you had that plate. That's all you needed. So I don't know anybody else that would have a similar story like that, but that shows you that this had to have some validity to it of what it meant. And
this unit, the Interplanetary Phenomenon Scientific and Technical Counterintelligence Unit, was established a couple years before the Roswell incident. Colonel Corso talks about it in his book. When they had some downed UFOs in the Los Angeles area, they established this unit. And that's, that was our grandfather. He claimed that he was a part of this throughout his NRO career.
Yeah, so another highly secretive group that he claimed to be a part of. And this is just another validation I found in the storage of files of an email or a letter to him in the late 90s. And it's actually correspondence with eventually getting or verifying MJ12 documents with Ryan and Bob Wood. And they're famous, the dad, Bob Wood, who I think recently passed away, but he was very famous they were both trying to validate the MJ12 documents even way back then. And apparently our grandfather was in talks to try to help them and give information that he had. So I thought that was significant. And Bob Wood actually wrote a book or helped with William Tompkins and trying to validate that information. So somebody that came out more recently. This is now what we'll talk about is the level of clearances. And this was found online, the security clearance chart that's there and that we blew up here. And so not sure who put that out, and we're not sure exactly how accurate it could be, but all these levels at the top are probably interrelated some way or another, because depending on what you're involved with, you have like ultra clearance or ultra cosmic top secret clearance. Majestic's obviously there, but he claimed cosmic was the highest, 38 levels above top secret. So there could be discrepancies, and we'll see that in the next slide, where he actually states this is the clearance level for having access to this, Majestic and others. So you can chime in if you want then. But yeah, this is the chart that actually is in the book that he put in the book, Star Wars City Map. And while he's describing this chart, it's basically a diagram of the military-industrial complex, and that came out. All the stuff in the book is something you can find on public record, and I think he did that to protect himself in the end. And this was in 2003, but this was already out by some other military admiral, colonel, whatever, lieutenant maybe. And it shows NRO, of course, at the top with the president and Magi also. And then you have the other levels of central intelligence, other intelligence agencies, heads of those branches of the military, all the aerospace corporations, contractors that would be working with it, even a media corporation, I think I can't read, Fujika or whatever. Quite a lot to dive into, and a lot of rabbit holes you can go with that, but that was kind of how they were connected. Let me know if you're going to say something, but when you go back to that, you'll see that he states Cosmic Q is level 33 Magi clearance, Majestic 12 came later, 32, and aircraft manufacturing 31. So, and then anything related to the back engineered ET crafts is ultra cosmic top secret. So that's what he states. And there was propelled actually antimatter reaction technology with some of these propulsion systems. It's pretty interesting. So that's a chapter in the book called Star Wars, and the Star Wars program back in the 80s that was set by Ronald Reagan and the Strategic Defense Initiative, basically that he says the NRO was wrapped up in, and that was like basically all that secret spy stuff that the NRO was doing went into the Star Wars program, and that was where they got even more budget and funding for it, besides all the black budget money they had already. And a lot of the funding that NRO had came from the CIA, since it came out of the CIA. And Dr. Sala does a great job of unraveling a lot of that history of the NRO and the funding and the black budget. If you read his Secret Space Force, or the Space Force book out of the series he has. But let's get to this topic, which is related to the DCCCD, which nobody else really mentioned, but our grandfather, not even in 2001, or I haven't heard it anywhere else. But he's referring to black mantas a lot, which is these TR-3B craft, and now we see it all the time. And he's saying that the NRO's agenda was to weaponize space against a threat from outer space, a false flag event, to do a false flag event based on this back engineered technology. So I don't know. I think it's hard to say at whatever level you're looking at. There's all sorts of you have all sorts of I guess intentions behind, and what's the motivation, and what's the tactics behind each level and each compartmentalized group. Who knows? I mean, it's so scattered, but at a certain level, maybe this is good to help get people aware of the fact that we're not alone, and this technology exists. But on another level, this can be used for not so good purposes of actually staging a whole invasion, and that could obviously put us step back, quite a ways back, than putting us forward where we want to be. So that's just something to be cautious of. And he was trying to warn people that that is really what they've been working on all these years, for decades now. And it's part of the NRO. It's called Development of Conscious Contact Citizenry Department. And again, maybe there's some good aspects to that, but there's some that might not be so good when it comes to this false flag. And this is just another slide to show you that he did speak about. He put it in the book, but he said nobody spoke about this in the Disclosure Project, and nobody's known about it. But it's called the DCCCD. It's part of the NRO, and it's developing this program. They have been developing this program for a long time, and the governments of the world are watching and waiting. So I think a lot of the governments, a lot of countries have access to certain bits of this technology. And what's happening, but I think nobody has the full picture, and that's, I think, what we're trying to get at. Like, we have to. Who knows what they're planning at the end of the day, and who has the final, who has their trigger on the button at the end of the day. But I don't know how much we're going to get into, but this is all the chapters within the book, and so we've tried to highlight some at very high levels, but you can tell just by reading it, he knew a lot about the history of UFOs, the German interaction with that, the secret cults, the Black Sun. He talks about the Vril Society, the Thule Society. He mentions Maria Orsic and those women that basically were channeling from some other race, and getting the information how to make these ships, these craft. So that was one story. The Kalahari retrievals are very important. We'll talk about what that was in South Africa, the Brotherhood Lodges, all the occult that went behind the Germans, and why they were so fascinated with, coming out, traveling all over the world, trying to find all these ancient artifacts. I remember at the very first talk, there was a question about when was the first crash retrieval. And in the book, our grandfather actually states that the Germans went to Brazil in 1931 and 32, and a team that was being led into one of these caverns found two craft. But he said it was ancient craft. It might not have been anything recent. It could have been crashed from thousands of years ago, but apparently they back engineered those craft from 31 and 32. So that's how far back he knew of this taking place. We'll get into some of these others as we go here. So, yeah. Just quickly, like, there's so much on the German technology, and we can barely scratch the surface, but he talks about the Hanabu 1, 2, 3 through 5, the RFC 1 through 7, the implosion technology that Victor Schauberger used, and that's kind of where, that's really what it's that free energy technology, pulling energy from the vacuum. All this stuff that we're hearing about, basically derived from things like that. And a lot of people have been talking about that now. These are just examples in the book of what he showed of the craft. You can keep going. And it mentioned pulse beam weapons, and they would start to put these cannons and lasers on these things eventually. And then interplanetary travel was the next step, using these motherships like the Atlantis. He says was operational, and you could land these Hannibal and RC craft on them. By 42, the Germans built the Andromeda mothership, which was cigar-shaped, and it could travel to other planets and hold up to 7 Hannibal craft on inside. And the Germans, with the Japanese help, had supposedly completed a one-way mission to Mars with the Hannibal 5 before World War II ended. So, and there's other people that have come out that said they did have that capability. And so, again, use your discernment, but this is what he said, maybe from files he had seen and access the information he had. The progression of these engineered craft, reverse engineering, like the Model Ts would be the circular shaped craft with the outer edges that would rotate with the different colored lights. The motherships would be more advanced for interstellar travel, and they would do warp speed. So he claimed warp 4 possibly would be as fast as they could go, 4 times the speed of light. And at the time that he knew, there were 17 to 18 different ET craft that they had in various shape, mass, and propulsion that they knew of. Are you able to go to the next slide?
Yeah. Can you see it?
Okay. Maybe it's a delay on my side. Sorry. So Kalahari's retrievals. This is the other chapter, and this lady Elizabeth Clare wrote Beyond the Light Barrier, and it really delves into a lot of the talk about her interaction. She was a contactee in South Africa for years. She was talking to a being from another planet. I think it was Alpha Centauri or one of those, and basically she had all the details about the technology of the ships and basically how they used their minds to run these ships, and used crystals. It was not nuts and bolts, similar to what others have said in the conference. So this was testimony way back then that he was aware of. And he said that this was one of the first craft that was completely intact when it came down. And the US was aware of this ship, and I think they tracked it and knew of her involvement with this the contactee. And so eventually they brought it down, I think with the Belgians' help, Belgian fighters that came in and got it, intercepted it. They took a C5 Galaxy big ship to take that craft back, and then reverse engineer and look into it. But anyway, he says we will all wind up kicking and screaming, some of us willing, going through what Native Americans call the void. And that's basically the 5th dimension is the void, and that's where we can, life occurs instantaneously. You can, when you think something, then it becomes, reality. You can manifest things. So I think that's where we're headed in these higher levels, and as we, lift the veil, not only of secrecy but of our consciousness. And not only do ETs did not need a body to material, they only used the body to materialize to come here on and this 3D plane that we are in, and show up as, whatever figure they decided to. And they could also travel without the ship using this particleization technology, which we'll talk about.
And that's one of the things that my grandfather told me when I was a teenager, one of the few times that he started to disclose this information in the 90s. It blew my mind when he started talking about this stuff, because I'd never heard of anything like that before.
And he mentioned the Philadelphia experiment to us, and he would mention movies. He'd be like, that's based on that's a real event. So he would just give us little bits of information, and that's what particleization is. This principle behind time travel. And what they did was they accidentally changed the frequency, or they cut into the middle of the wavelength, I guess, by changing frequencies between the dimensions. They cut a hole into space time basically, and caused the ship not only to become invisible, but to relocate somewhere else and alter time in the same instance. So I think, and if you read certain books, like Tesla apparently was working on this secretly, and even Einstein might have been a part of it, but they were warning them. Tesla was trying to warn them, we are not ready to go live yet. Do not do this. And apparently they tried to, make the program go ahead of schedule. And that's probably why all this happened. But lot of interesting technology involved with it. Then that we can't really get into all of it, but that's what he mentions in the book. And the last chapter of the book is the Wingmakers and the Ancient Era site. And this is a whole nother topic and kind of a rabbit hole to go down, but he claimed it was legit that this exists, and the Wingmakers are apparently our future aspects of ourselves from 750 years into the future. They left a time capsule in Chaco Canyon, New Mexico. This was found by some hikers, but eventually the NSA got involved. And then on the next level of that is the ACIO, which involves just alien advanced tech or alien types of tech back in the 50s. Once all these retrievals were starting to happen, that's like the super secretive group. So they found these 23 chambers in this cavern and all these paintings and artifacts. And that's actually a couple of the paintings there. And they could decode the first of the 23 segments of the disc. And out of all these hieroglyphs and petroglyphs, there's 8,000 pages of text. Well over 8,000 pages. So quite a lot of information. I'm sure they probably could have deciphered more by now, but this all goes into remote viewing, how they found the site and everything else. And it leads to the ACIO, which our grandfather was the only one to mention that in 2001, and the Disclosure Project. This just happens to be the website that you can find now, and the two individuals that have come out claiming that they are the ACIO at one level, another, Peter the Insider's ACIO 12th Division and Jessica's 6th Division. So we've talked to them actually and tried to get information and see what they would be able to share with us. And we'll kind of get into that next too, as far as what we found. But that the Wingmakers is a huge topic, and it's about them trying to warn us, kind of help us, guide us, and eventually help our spiritual development and let us grow in what they call the grand portal, or the scientific discovery of the soul. Right. That is the end goal for us to basically evolve spiritually, and as well as scientifically, and hopefully the right way. But 15 was like the head of this group, and a super secretive group within that organization. Those are how the level structures were built. So like special access programs, military industrial complex at that level 1 barrier, and then after that ACIO and above. So they were working directly with ETs apparently, and trying to basically get to develop time travel. And 15 kind of went off on his own to try to have access to that technology and use it for his own benefit in a way that was without any oversight. That's the story, and that's part of what the Wingmakers story talks about. There's a whole website you can go to. It describes the chambers, all these paintings, and it's controversial about the site and what's still supposedly true. It's changed over the years, but they lay out these other time capsules, other places around the world, 7. Our grandfather said, there's more. That we've heard there's more than that, but here's just a list and a good diagram to show you what that site looked like. Again, it's a lot of information to cover. The Wingmakers also ties kind of with what they call the Lyricist teachings within the Wingmakers, is actually part of the Urantia book.
Just
actually,
a quick time check for you guys.
Yeah.
Since we started late, you still have 10 minutes, right?
Okay. Yeah, we'll go quickly. So her grandfather did teach the Urantia book actually later on in Taos, and so we see similarities when we look at the Lyricist Wingmakers teachings. So you can go to the next slide, and the seven universes and the central universe was talked about within the Urantia book, similar to the central universe and form builders within the Wingmakers. It's a lot of ties, but we don't have to talk about that. Right. And I don't think we're going to go through one by one of these, but this is to show you that we've done our own research to try to get to the bottom of things and find out how much did our grandfather really know. So we've asked the ACIO, as we mentioned. We've asked somebody else, Johann Fritz, as he's known, and Will Nutter, about the secret space program, that he had access to some files. We asked him, and Tony Rodriguez, we've asked him about, and he has his own remote viewing class, and so we can show some of those maybe as a high level of what he's been able to provide. If you want to keep going,
he did a double blind remote viewing with a handful of people, and they from based on a number, they were able to see all these different things, all corroborating about UFO technology. we had another remote viewing done, and then we had a direct channel done by someone who, when our grandfather came through, it was told that their identity should not be exposed for their safety. So we have some summaries of kind of what the information came through for all those sources here.
So I won't go into all the detail, but they even said, Peter the Insider even claimed that our grandfather worked at the MJ12 level, and he worked at that, trying to figure out how the technology worked. And we found that it corroborates with some of this other independent sources. Again, none of these people talk to each other. Some of them don't even like each other, but they have the story starts to line up as you go through and see this. So it's very interesting. They say we are actually, me and my brother might be involved in some way. When it comes to the secret space program, it gets very, it just becomes kind of obscure into this other realm of possibilities. And we don't know of that ourselves. We don't know what's true or not with that, but we're willing to entertain the idea and, see where it goes. If we can, have the quantum healing type of, regressions to get that to come out. We've tried some of that and had some other people that have helped us. So we'll see. But this is about particleization and time travel. And she was able to channel, Eliana Ka was able to channel this and get some details about remote viewing, basically the starts of that and how he might have been involved. So I'll just say that and we can move on. Will Nutter's part about the super soldier programs, the training that our grandfather went in, and supposedly he had 2 different altars and again was involved in the deep underground bases and MJ12, but we don't have to go into details on that. Just keep going. Some of stuff on us. And this was the double blind experiment we just mentioned with Tony, which shows you what they, based on just a number, a 6-digit number, they're coming up with a saucer looking craft, looks like a tunnel somewhere, somebody on like a table being examined, somebody maybe within a ship or just in a circular room, obviously, and being analyzed or being, taken. It's kind of like a serious situation. They talk about the emotions they feel and everything else as they're doing this. And so this was the first one. We have another one in the next couple of pages that are similar as far as being underground, dealing with technology, multiple levels underground, inner earth, needing security to get through, people working on screens and computers. A lot of this starts to add up after a while. And that was just 2 of the 7, I think, that did the remote viewing and had some good results. And so then this was the person, again, that channeled a grandfather that he even said, if assuming that it was him, that they should not release who they are for their own safety. So anyway, this also came up with him working on the technology early on and trying to get to the bottom of it and eventually interacting with the ETs themselves. And supposedly, that was the best way because he no longer wanted the military or the higher levels trying to intervene. It just took too long to figure out how to use the tech. Did you want to add to that, Dan?
Yeah. And when they surfed the crash retrievals, he was in charge of the team that had to back engineer. And eventually there were too many middlemen when they started to contact the ETs to get information on how to progress with the technology. So they had to have him talk to them directly. And some of the encounters were actually on their ships, is what she claimed.
Okay. Yeah. And then just briefly on this part, like there was 98% of what he felt he shouldn't put in the book. Like there's some tremendous amounts he left out just because he felt like it was, 90% of his career was top secret is what he's claiming. And so it's just a lot of information that he didn't go into details about the specific programs he was involved or dates or people, but I think he did that on purpose. If you read the book, you'll see that clearly. The deep underground bases with Phil Schneider, we won't go delve into that, but people know his story, and our grandfather said he was a friend of his, and he paid for it with his life. But he wasn't afraid to die because he had cancer, apparently from getting radiation burns from being around these aliens and whatnot. I found letters, if you keep going, that kind of corroborate this story. And this is the Dulce files. I think the man that came out was known as Branton, and he talks about the different types of Draco beings, the gray aliens that were the subservients to the Draco, the different colors and their roles, and maybe they were actually native to the planet. And that's the claim here, as they were discussing. And keep going.
Yeah, and these are documents from our grandfather's, from his storage unit that we found of his conversations with these people about the
Yeah,
topics.
just within the last few years. They talked about the subterranean network highway. And then the next part is interesting because they talk about the different the factions of the 33rd degree Masons, of the higher degrees above that, how they were trying to do these alternative 1, 2, or 3, like to hide down in these bunkers, in these caverns, while they destroy the rest of the planet. That was their ultimate goal. Or they would go to the moon and Mars and let the rest of the world die off, basically. So he was explaining these factions, or the left and the right, are pitted against each other, but they're kind of one and the same when you get up to very highest level as who's controlling this. And it's like a Luciferian cult. It gets into that satanic and dark stuff that we're probably hearing more about within Hollywood, within a lot of the politics and everything else. So a lot of this is coming to light. This was talked about way back then, and our grandfather, he would stamp things that he would say, this is confirming, yes, it's true.
Yeah, he had his stamp for the scientific technical counterintelligence unit that he would stamp on documents that were, he wouldn't come out right out and say, this is true, but this is kind of approval, nodding that this is worth investigating.
And this is corroborating that he was telling the story with somebody else, that validating what he had to say in his comments about that. And then that maybe supposedly they cleared the dumbs out by now. At that point when it was written, it wasn't sure if they had, or they could still be there. But apparently we've heard too that the dumps may have been cleared in the last 10 years or so. So that's interesting to note. And then David Wilcott mentions our dad in his book Ascension Mysteries, and that's just interesting.
Our grandfather, yeah.
Our grandfather, and his ties to some of these other high-level insiders that David Wilcott talks about. So it was just interesting that he notes him in his book several times, talking about even some of the stuff about materializing food and eating food. Only 15 to 25 people in the world, having that access at that level was also mentioned, which our grandfather would mention quite a bit. When you're at that level, there's only a handful of people at any one time, I guess, in the military to have that access. So that's really it. This is the very final thing. Maybe just the quote at the end is very nice, but the approaching the mental shift, he was talking about vibrations of light, the technology that these beings use, obviously more advanced, and they have a higher consciousness than us. Many of our religions were based on these reports of angels and invisible realities. So a multiple dimensionality of all of this is very important. It's all based on harmonics of light, the spectrum of many realities, and the science of light technology, that the way the ETs move. And we are now approaching that world and merging of our world, our reality, with theirs. So that's why I think a lot of this is coming to light right now. This is one of the last quotes he said. Well, some days 40% of the people wake up and say, I know this, I have that heritage within my DNA, within my genes. Suddenly everybody will realize the truth. It seems like a lot of us seem to be on that path now. And the last quote is, it is only through public demand that the veil of secrecy can be lifted. The entire subject of UFOs should be open to thorough study with public involvement. The Black Project should be viewed as an unidentifiable misuse of our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, of we the people and by the people. It is not a time to be fearful, but a time to be bold. And that was 2003 from the book. So.
Yeah, he was very passionate about disclosure and getting the truth out there. And we just feel honored that we can carry out his message as well. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we presented at a conference last May, Rebels of Disclosure. And at that conference, there was a person in the audience that was able to clairvoyantly see our grandfather while we were giving the presentation. And since that time, through her clairvoyant vision and clear audience, her mediumship gifts that she's had all her life, she has been in direct contact with him on the other side for the last 8 months. And we recently had her on our show, Shred the Veil, on our YouTube channel to talk about that. But it's been life-changing, the validations that she comes up with about, personal details about Derek and I's childhood that confirm, who the source is. And a lot of information, military type information that's kind of cryptic that we're trying to decipher and find out more about. So it's been fascinating to experience that over the past year. And I just wanted to mention that too, as new things are unraveling and we're